you want me to use the mic?
Yes, I do. I know. So demanding.
Hello, everyone. Test, test. Is that working?
No.
No.
I think
You have
there's
it
a
on?
mute button. There's a mute. It says mute on it.
Yeah, now it's mute. Test. Test, test. Perfect. I don't have it. Oh, technical. Okay.
I have very little power, but I like to use it. How could you do
The orange button.
Yeah, it's like.
Test. Test. This one's also.
Just freezes.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. So I'm going to talk.
Yeah, it took
Test,
about
test, test.
I thought that you had to
I don't see any red light on.
every word. I'm like, oh my god.
Marie likes my
Test, 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 test.
Nice.
Does that affect yours too?
No. Yeah, test, test.
I'd love to go back. Did you get us tickets yet for January? Can you try again?
I gotta get on.
Test, test. That'll work.
Because I can't hear you.
Thanks. Okay, now, I guess now we can officially get things going. Not big of a mic person, but we are taping this, so as well, there'll probably be some photos taken throughout, so if you do not want your photo taken while the camera's pointed, you just, I don't know, make a non-photographic face or something. Thanks everyone for making the time to be here before. There's some introductions I want to go through. I'm going to go through the bios of our speakers up here, but I do want to recognize a few people. The Honorable Jeannie Dendies for being here. Congratulations again. And Minister responsible for Women's Directorate, Yukon Workers Health and Safety Board, as well as Tourism and Culture. So quite the portfolio, and thanks so much. And then and beside her is Kurt Diekman, who I've known over the years and worked quite closely with the President and CEO of Yukon Workers' Compensation Health and Safety Board. Thanks so much for being here. Yesterday, just a bit of a overview of yesterday was part one of post-traumatic stress disorder and the many phases of trauma. So we went over who's at risk, what are the impacts, does peer support exist in Yukon, and are we doing enough to help affected individuals? And then today's will be hearing, helping, and healing. So we're going to, the prevention, support, and treatment, resources for families, workplace accommodations, and best practices. Again, thanks so much for being here. I'm going to go through a couple of the bios, and Amanda for doing the translating. Amanda Smith, thank you so much. I will do it slower today than yesterday. On the far right here, Devin Bailey. Devin started his career in EMS as a volunteer in Dawson City back in the mid-90s. At that time, he also worked as a wildland firefighter on an initial attack crew. In 2001, he moved to Whitehorse in order to pursue a full-time career with Yukon Emergency Medical Services as a primary care paramedic. In 2009, he returned to school and obtained his advanced care paramedic diploma and currently works as a team lead for the medevac program. Throughout his 20-year career in EMS, Devin has witnessed the damage PTSD causes to several of his peers. Devin started recognizing warning signs in himself and decided to take an in-depth look at how he could continue to be effective in his profession without sacrificing his mental well-being, a task he continues to work at every day. Devin has also been a vocal advocate for presumptive legislation in Yukon and works towards ensuring those who are affected by post-traumatic stress, illness, injury, trying to get away from the disorder, are supported as they work towards healing and recovery. And again, yesterday, as I mentioned in his email, I'd asked people to send their bios, and except for Nicole, I wrote a special one for you. He had said you can just sum it up by saying 20-year medic, but I think we would have missed a lot of who Devin really is. And Nicole Bringsli. Thank you so much for being here. Nicole's a registered psychologist in both the provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan. She is a master's level psychologist who has worked in the area of forensics, education, mental health, and clinical and counseling psychology. In particular, Nicole has done a significant amount of work in the area of trauma, abuse, and maltreatment. She has worked across various age spans, including children, adolescents, and adults. The Creative Work Psychologist Services team, and I'm glad that also part of that team was Kirsten Timpany, did I pronounce that right? And Andre Benoit, who were also psychologists with Creative Works team. So the Creative Works Psychologist Services team aim to provide individuals with what they need at the time they need it with professional and expert knowledge. Again, I want to thank our guests for being here, all in attendance. And I just want to read a couple of things that I didn't do a bio on myself, but I'm Jim Regimbal, Fire Chief, Dawson City. I didn't go through this yesterday. I also sit as the President of the Association of Yukon Fire Chiefs. Close to 30 years in the fire service. Also had a small business, coffee shop, and also lived part of my life, probably from 16 to 18 years in the back of the Salvation Army Men's Hostel in Montreal. So kind of a wide variety. I've seen quite a bit. After yesterday, I went back, had a bit of a quiet night. Didn't sleep too well. Woke up and a few numbers were popping up in my head. And I think over the span of my career, 17 suicides. I've witnessed 6 of them. A couple of close friends taking their lives. So a lot of it builds up, and this is nice that we're able to. Like I said yesterday, we have not been in a room, or I haven't in 10 years, where there's this many people discussing the importance of post-traumatic stress injury. And as much as I'm more of a fire background, I do want to make everyone aware that in my role as president, I'll be working, and I have been, and I look forward to working with the new government in advancing post-traumatic stress injury and ensuring it's legislated and is presumed work-related. First responders, what I mean by first responders, nurses, corrections, a whole spectrum. So I didn't, yesterday I don't think I made that point too clear, that this isn't only about firefighters and paramedics. This is, we're a whole team, so we've got to work like a team. And just in saying that, before we get right into it, hopefully I didn't lose the sheet that I wanted to read off. We'll come to 465. Okay, so that'll work. In his mandate letter to the Minister of Public Service, Safety and Emergency Preparedness, the Prime Minister listed the following among top priorities: work with provinces and territories and the Minister of Health to develop a coordinated national action plan on post-traumatic stress disorder, which disproportionately affects public safety officers. So again, that was from our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. Also which I'm glad to say, in their election platform, the Yukon Liberals stated that the Yukon Liberal government will amend the Yukon Workers' Compensation Act to include presumptive provisions for PTSD and first responders. Pretty huge, and I really look forward to collaboratively working together with the government and with the proper people and the various agencies so that we can move this forward. The last thing we want to see, and I did mention it yesterday, was the Senate committee meeting in Ottawa on concussions. I think some of you heard me say this yesterday. They were discussing concussions and how it's affecting NHL players, and huge discussions. Ken Dry and a few other people there, but Eric Lindros, I think, hit home the point that if we're dealing with concussions at the NHL level, we're missing the boat. By then, there's so many NHL players that don't even remember the last concussion they had because they've had so many. So post-traumatic, we've got to work on the prevention, the education, and also have in place the presumptive piece for the people that are diagnosed with it. So in saying that, and I think we've been very delicate over the years of how we want to talk about it in the fire service. Very seldom do we talk about it. Right? You suck it up and you carry on and you do your work, and I think a lot of you have heard that. And even myself, a lot of times, as much as I want to move things forward, I've been a little reluctant. But I think, like I said yesterday, a great quote from Winston Churchill was, if you want to get your point across, don't be subtle and clever with your words, use a pile driver. And I think that's what needs to be done. So in saying that, I'd like to have Devin go over his background, and then we can get into some questions and move this forward. Again, thanks so much, everyone.
Well, first of all, it's great to see so many people in the room talking about this. Even just to have Jim here talk about it, it takes a lot of courage. So thank you, Jim. When I first started here in Whitehorse 15 years ago, after a particularly nasty car accident, one of the senior medics said that if you can't handle that, you're in the wrong line of work. That was my debriefing, and that's how I started off my career. That medic later got full-blown PTSD. Basically, his whole life crumbled around him, and he's been off work ever since. So that is the wrong way to go about dealing with this issue. Luckily now, it's being recognized as an actual illness, and now that we recognize it, there's a lot more education around it, and the goal in my mind for all first responders would be to have enough support and enough education that you never get to the point where it is negatively impacting your life to the point that you start losing sight of what's important, like relationships and healthy living. For myself, I probably about 5 years ago, I started recognizing that I was very angry all the time. I told myself I wasn't going to tear up. You hurt the ones you love the most, and then it hurts you. And I usually have a handle on it, but it's a very personal issue to me. I've seen it destroy a lot of good friends in one way or another. You start feeling like you lose sight of who you are. You feel like you can't be competent at your job anymore. You can't be competent as a father. You can't be competent as a husband. So that being said, I've never had a diagnosis of PTSD, but you can see how deeply it affects me. I since made the decision because of that same gentleman who told me to suck it up 15 years ago. He designed a course called Toolbox for First Responders. And through that I recognized myself that there are some very basic, simple changes I can make in my life and my career that can help me mitigate some of the factors. So I stopped working overtime, just that. But that was not, it sounds like such an easy thing to do, but in the EMS culture, you feel guilty when the phone rings and you say no. You feel like if you're not there, then who's going to respond? But you have to realize that that's not my burden to bear. That's a system issue. So I started taking vacation days. It was also difficult to get vacation. You need to, I'm not a great planner, but to get vacation time, you need to put your leave in ahead of time. So now I put leave in. I take my sick days now, which before I never used to take my sick days. And just those small changes really help. Of course, talking with counselors helps. Talking with family really helps. But my kids and I and my wife have a joke that if I have a bad day or I'm feeling down, I just say I have a touch of the PTSD. It's one of Daddy's grumpy days. But there's supports out there now. The recognition is out there now, and I'm optimistic that that there's in the future there'll be enough education and training and support that it will hopefully not destroy good people's lives. As a paramedic and firefighter or CMP nurse, we get to be involved with a lot of intimate tragic moments in people's lives. And every time we experience that, we may be there in a medical capacity, but it takes a little piece of your soul, and if you can't replenish that, you can find yourself basically feeling like a shell, and that's not a good feeling, because you get into this line of work to help people, to make a difference. And so I'm ecstatic that we're all here talking about this. I'm sorry that I got emotional. I tried not to, but that's another thing too. And then with the new people coming in, I make sure I tell them if they're having a bad day or went to a bad call, it's okay to cry. It feels good to cry. Lots of people, and I think it's a good role model to see heroes cry. It's not a bad thing to cry. I think that we need to, and we are starting to redefine about what strength is defined as, and sometimes strength is having the courage to stand up and say, I'm hurting and I need help. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Nicole.
I think there's a prime example. It's unfortunate that we have to say that sorry for showing our emotions, and it's nice to know that we are moving forward. We have a long way to go, but it's nice to know we're moving forward. Before I pass it over to Nicole in the back of the room, two people I do want to thank for making this happen, as well as Steve Geck and Deborah. Over there, Steve had approached me and asked me if I'd be interested in chairing a couple of sessions, lunch hour sessions on post-traumatic stress injury and the healing, and through there it worked out really well. And one thing nice to, when you're chairing something and you have amazing guest speakers, you really don't have to do much, and we've had super guest speakers. So Devin, thanks so much for sharing that. I know we've touched base quite a bit in the last couple of years, and in that, I can pass it over to Nicole.
I wore the shirt for you too. Oh my God. Even firefighters need heroes. Thank you.
It says paramedics, even firefighters need heroes.
I got the music fest.
So I didn't have anything prepared, but I'm going to kind of talk a little bit because Devin brought up some really good points. And two of the big things with PTSD is the feeling of dangerousness in the world and competency. And I think that's a huge piece of our work with people, is the competency piece. And I hope that we as therapists continue to advocate for the systems. I've seen forums come through where there's questions asked and the way it's posed really make a person feel terrible about coming forward and saying, I'm having a hard time. So it's just even some education about forums and the way we present things. Because a lot of the people we see are super competent people that have done a lot of amazing things, and to come in and ask for help. And the process really has to be about, okay, here you are, and really reminding them of all the competencies and the strengths that they've had throughout their careers or their lives, and then building on that and saying, okay, right now we're not in a good place, but we're going to get back to it. And really empowering versus making somebody feel like really pathologized. And I think that's a really big piece of our work. I think one thing we've definitely learned is that PTSD does not have a mold. Like, every single person comes to their job and what they do with their own set of life experiences. And that's a big piece that we're asked to do that's a real struggle, to say, well, what caused what? And we can do pieces of that, but it's also very challenging because people come with their own belief systems, values, maybe some of the things that they were struggling with before they got into, had an occupational stress injury. But either way, it's for us as therapists, we got to work through it with them, whatever it is. And it's really hard to put in a box sometimes. So I think we've kind of worked, I think, in our practice on developing an approach where we do a lot of education about brain development and arousal continuums and hypervigilance and relationships and We try and actually bring a lot of science into it, which I think is helpful to people, because they come in going, I'm broken, I'm fragmented, and we go, okay, well, let's really look at what you've been exposed to. Let's look at how brain changes happen over time, depending on like pattern repetitive exposure to really traumatic events. Let's look at how you have to change. You cannot go and work and see dead children, sexual assaults, violence, continually work with people that are breaking social norms and a lot of the common morality we have in society, and stay exactly the same you were when you started. So part of our work too is the grief of that, the grief of people trying to remember who they were before they started whatever work they were doing and who they are today. So part of it's grief work, part of it's recognizing that if you're in a persistent field of work where you are constantly dealing with threat, or you think that threat could happen, like you have to adjust. Like an example is, if we have a child growing up in a violent home, we don't start doing therapy. We get them safe and then we do therapy. But we don't strip away their survival skills. And I think that's a really challenging thing for people in their professions. They still have to go to work. So how do they work through what they're dealing with, as well as keep some of those skills up to keep themselves safe? Another big piece of work that we've been doing quite a bit in our practice is we work from a systems perspective. So we don't believe that a person comes alone. Like Devin said, I started to, when you talked about your family and your kids. So we recognize that people don't live in isolation, and we see a lot of damages in marriages and with their children. So, like for example, I see a lot of individual people, and Kirsten is our one of our couple counselors at Creative Works, and I might say, hey, I've got this person, we're looking at post-traumatic stress. Can we book something for this couple? Can we really go through what the criteria is? And we start the education, and we involve the partners, and we involve the children. We've got a really cool kids book about heroes in the home, and we try and work with kids on that, on understanding this is what it means when your parent comes home like this, and this is why they're coming here, and this is what we're working on. So we try and bring the systems together, because the one thing we want is, if they're coming in and somebody's not doing well, we want to make sure nothing else doesn't go well. So we're like, okay, let's start working on your family. Let's not create a secondary problem. So we're trying to do a little bit of damage control in the beginning and education, build some understanding. And that also takes a lot of heat off the person going through the PTSD, because a lot of times they don't know how to explain it. So I think that's a really important piece that gets overlooked, is that like kids are affected by this. When a parent comes home and they get really mad or throw things around or punch a door because they saw something really traumatic, that's going to affect the children. So this is a preventative piece I think we can do, is to realize that we have to work with the whole system. Because there's so much guilt that comes in, I find, from the adults that we see about how things have gone with their children. Like, I think many people with kids know that when we hurt our children, it hits us tenfold. And there's a lot of shame and regret when people start to really start to look at their journey of how they got to where they are. And that's a big piece of what we need to help, because then that leads to addiction, that leads to suicide, that leads to, so there's all kinds of things that we're really trying to see and assist the person with, so that they can feel supported. So I think a big perspective that we come from is teach people the science, teach them about brain change, teach them about the symptoms. Devin brought up little things. One of the first things I say to somebody is, okay, let's work on no overtime. But that is super challenging, and it is that feeling of, what if something happens to my colleague, we're short shifted, I'm not there, they get hurt, I'm gonna have to live with that, I better go in. So there's a lot of, because it's a tight team, right? So we start to work on little changes, and the little changes really help. And I have a few people that say, hey, I'm starting my career in this, and I know I need to talk to somebody. I'm coming in from the very beginning, and they're being proactive. So we're starting to see people taking charge at the very beginning and saying, okay, I want to start talking through things as they happen. So there is support out there. I think it's really important that we empower people, that we realize that we have to build their levels of competency. We have to help them start to see that not all of the world is a bad place, even though you spend a lot of time in that place. And that comes into having time off work, building interests. So it's a really global perspective that we're looking at. We're not just coming in and saying to somebody, tell us about this thing that you saw. We're like, okay, we work on people regulating themselves first, like, okay, let's talk about sleep and eating and balancing life. Like, we regulate people. We don't go into trauma until we know that that person can keep themselves safe in the process. And that's another big thing that's important. We have had people come forward and get more traumatized when they've had the wrong therapy. Because sometimes people go in and they think, I'll just pull out the bad stuff and then that will make everything better. People have to feel power in the process. So if you send them into talking about some of the darkest times of their life and they are already struggling to keep themselves okay on a day-to-day basis, you're creating more harm. And that's the piece about how this is a specialized area of work. Like, people have to know what they're doing, because when somebody comes for help, if it goes bad, they might not come back, right? So it is a specialty area of training. There's a ton of research out there. There's lots of stuff that can be done. But we gotta work from the systems. We have to empower people. So making people feeling competent from the very beginning of the process and respected is a really big piece of engagement. We have to be supportive. And that can be a challenge, because you also have other systems to potentially answer to, right? So that's a little bit about, I guess, our work. I don't know if that's, I'm missing anything.
No, that's great, thanks. And I think you hit one key piece there, and we have to know too, a lot of pieces, but we have to know that we can go somewhere. A lot of times we don't know where to go to, and last year I had one of my officers come in and just a very strong individual. They just broke down in my office, and he said he's dealing with so many things, he's not sure where to go. And it was, afterwards, I felt I didn't have the right tools as a leader to say. I kept asking him, what do you need? And he was beyond that point. He wanted to hear what's in place, and I wanted to be able to say, this is what's in place, this is how I can help you. And thank goodness, just some amazing doctors. In Dawson City, I was able to get him to go and see the doctor, get the professional help he needed, and off to see a psychologist. So, and he was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress injury that he's dealing with on a daily basis, and he's doing fantastic. However, that process took 4 months from the point he came to my office to actually being accepted, his claim being accepted. And at one point he was taking some jobs up to Dempster on his own, and I was talking with his wife. She'd phoned me, she was worried, and actually drove up there. And he was in a truck with a gun, ready to shoot himself. So able to talk him through that. But I think as leaders, I want to know what's out there. I want the proper training so that I can help my people. But in saying that, working with, and a lot of times, and I think Kurt can attest to this, you always hear the bad instead of the good, and the bad in the sense that it took so much and so long for his claim to get together. And there were a lot of things, people going on vacation. Unfortunately, his file sat on the desk, and I think the good thing that came out of it is he's doing really well right now. And it was nice to get a call from one of your claims officers and actually apologizing and saying, I'm sorry that this took too long, and we made a mistake on it. And I thanked him for it, and I said, yeah, a mistake was made, but let's make sure that doesn't happen again. So as much as you hear claims not going through, on the positive side of it, I just had breakfast with someone today that was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder 2 weeks ago, and it's been smooth sailing. He said he's never had such a good a good working relationship and just moving through the process right from his family doctor to the family doctor saying, yeah, I think I'd like to refer you to a specialist to see if you have post-traumatic stress. And right there, boom, things were put in place. So I think as we move forward, and for people working within WCB, they want policies that they can use too. I mean, there's a policy in place right now, but unfortunately, it's just a piece of paper. And the people working in the caseworkers aren't the ones that wrote that policy. So if you're going to put a policy in place, and I look at it, if I put a guideline on it in the fire hall, I better make sure that I can follow that guideline. And if not, let's get the right guideline and right policy in place. And what I've done throughout my career, and it happened when I was in the military in some pretty ugly situations. I don't have to go into them, but now on, regardless of the size of the call and how small it is, we meet in the fire hall afterwards and discuss it. And some people are open and discuss it and talk about it, and some people can't discuss it, but they know my door is always open. I have a great working relationship with the local doctors that they can go in and talk to them about it. So I think it's just encompassing everyone and knowing that we're not alone out there, and getting past that stigma, and again, being able to say, hey, you know what, this is affecting me, and being able to talk about it. Andre, Kirsten, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, thanks. Good deal.
Just as Kirsten's coming up, I think one of the things I've learned over time too, right, is that people are often like, I'm good. And I'm like, okay, you're good till you're not good. So we use the analogy of like a cup. And we're like, okay, so you go to a call, or you deal with a death, you deal with and you're like, I'm good. And then one day something happens and you have no more room. Right? And and all of a sudden, I don't know what happened. And so what we're trying to do is educate people to say is, you need to keep room in the cup, because if you can't keep depositing and not ever take anything out, right? So that's where a lot of times when people have come to us after a long career, we're like, okay, I usually call it the vault. I'm like, okay, we're gonna go in the vault, we gotta pull something out, and we have a model that we work from, but it's slowly, and I often find that once we've started pulling on one thing, it's like pulling something out of a messy closet. You go, oh, I'm just gonna get this item, and everything starts falling out. So that's where the work has to be really regulated, and that's where being preventative, like doing critical incident debriefings. And I've had a lot of first responders sort of like, because there's a lot of hypervigilance and trust issues, I find that the critical debriefs are good because they're almost checking you out to see, like, can I sit in a room with this person? and then usually I always get some phone calls after, because it's that dangerousness, that trust, so the critical debriefings also introduce people to this idea about wellness, and I find there's usually a follow-up after. So those are things I think that can be modeled by the workplace or by our community, that kind of just introduce people to the fact that you can reach out and get help, and it's not as scary as people might think it is. Sorry,
Thank you. So I have a very strong interest in working with families and children, and I'll keep this short because I'm sure that there's lots of questions out there. But I just wanted to say that it's been my experience that when there is trauma in a family or in a relationship, what is behind